Hey everyone, it's Dan and Don from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Once again, that website address is theclinicaltrialsguru.com, the best place on the internet for clinical trials content and information. We have a very special guest for today's Guest Guru segment, Roberto Abadi. He's the author of The Professional Guinea Pig, and he was kind enough to send us a copy a couple months back. I read it. I think he did his homework on this. It's a great book. It is a bit controversial, and some people may agree with it, some people may not, but the whole point is to get people talking, and that's what we're going to do. So, Roberto, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for sending the book, and it seems like you really did your homework on it. Can you tell us and our audience a little bit about you? I know about you, but can you tell our audience about you?
Well, I'm an anthropologist. I'm a medical anthropologist, and I think that would be important for your audience is that I was 10 years ago a guinea pig, not a professional guinea pig because I only did 2 trials, but I was doing my master's degree in Quebec in Canada, and it was a big contract research organization just across the campus at Université Laval called Anna Farm. And they were always asking for volunteers. I volunteered for a couple of trials. I think one was a gastritis trial, and another was a trial for an experimental medication. I forgot completely about that experience. And then in 2001, with Ellen Roche died at Johns Hopkins, that really got me going and thinking about, who are the people that are really doing phase 1 trials? Who are they? Which are their motivations to participate, their experiences? How much money really influences their decision to participate and their perceptions of risks, and the ethics of paying poor people to do the things. Mm-hmm. So I really I was doing my PhD at the time, and I'm an anthropologist. So I went to Philadelphia, to West Philly, and I lived with a group of professional guinea pigs. They call themselves professional guinea pigs. Some have done more than 100 trials.
Wow.
And I lived with them for more than 1 year. I followed them to the trials. I asked them many, many questions about what they were doing, what they were thinking about it, the experiences, their feelings about everything, their views of the industry, a lot of things. And I wrote my dissertation, and then I turned the dissertation into a book.
Excellent. And for those of you who don't know, what phase 1 means, it's the first in human studies that they do. So it's the very first. Clinical trials have 4 phases, and even more if you include the labs and the animal trials. But then when you get into the human trials, there's 4 phases. Phase 1 is considered the riskiest of all, but it's necessary to be done for the other phases to be able to exist. And phase 1, they're usually done on healthy volunteers, with the exception of cancer and some psychiatry trials. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they are done on healthy volunteers, where one can argue, and certainly Roberto will argue this, that there is no other incentive other than money. So, Don, you had something to share?
Well, I had a question. The group that you lived with, were these strictly healthy, normal people?
Yeah, they're totally healthy. Not perfectly healthy, and when they get enrolled into the trial, they have to go through these questionnaires about whether they had some medical background in the family, some congenital conditions, and of course, if they use drugs or if they take any medications at the time, and of course, if they say yes, that would really disqualify them for being a volunteer, right, in the trial. So they lie sometimes, but most of the time they're really very healthy. They're not on drugs, they're not on meds, they're really ready, they're very professional in the sense that they know what it takes to be a volunteer. And everybody told me, being a volunteer is somebody that's willing to say yes to everything. You don't argue with the staff, you don't argue with the people running the trials. You do what they are being told to do. It's a job, right? It's not that you're a volunteer and you are doing this because you really want to have science, or you do it because of the goodness of your heart. You do it because it's your job, like any other job, and you don't argue with your manager or at McDonald's. You don't argue with people in the clinical trials. You do what you are told. You know how to do it. You can take it. It's really boring. They're ready to do it, and they're ready to keep coming back and many times, so they can really build a career and get an income and a living through doing these things. So I think that's an important part part of my research is that it's the first time that somebody really took the care to study this group of people. Some philosophers, some bioethicists have been writing about the ethics of paying people to do phase 1 trials, where it's right or wrong, and there are different opinions, of course, like I think in everything else in life. But my work is the first work to really flesh it out, talk about who they are. I said just a small group of people, not more than 20 in Philadelphia, and from there I just made, I draw this larger picture about the state of the professional Guinea pigs in the country. So I think it's just a window into the way clinical trials are organized in America. That's the value of work.
Roberto, you still there?
Yeah.
All right, I thought we lost you for a second.
Oh, no.
Okay. I did have a question, but now I kind of evaded
Yeah.
because I was listening to what you were saying. How much money have you seen one individual, just looking at one individual, how much money do you think they've made in a year's time?
About 20, 22, 25. If they do 8 trials a year, they may get away with making 20,000. In very good years, they may make 22, 25. They're supposed to wait 30 days in between trials. It's called a washout period.
Right.
But there's not a centralized registry for really making sure that they do. So some do and some don't. And even worse, not from the population I studied, that they seem to be really conscious about risks and doing the right thing, but in some guinea pigs, some professional subjects do more than one trial at the same time. They do 2 trials at the same time.
That's not good.
So that really it's a very problematic thing because it endangers them, but also compromises the validity of the data that are being produced. I have some recommendations to work about that, and maybe we can talk about that later. But what I'm going to say is that about your question, how much money they can make. If they do 8 trials a year, waiting 30 days in between trials and maybe failing to be recruited in a trial, and you have to wait a little month or a little time to be able to enroll in another one. It's 8 trials a year. I think it's reasonable. Every day, pay for people in Philadelphia. They told me, we won't get less than $200 or $300 a day. If it's less than that, we won't do that trial and we just wait for another one.
Okay.
Because Philadelphia is a major hub for pharmaceutical trials, and they have a lot of opportunities. If you're in the Midwest, then the pay is lower, and the opportunities you have to volunteer are also not as good. So you may take worse conditions or not as good as pay as people in Philadelphia. But on average, I would say $20,000. It's a good number.
Now, I had a question. In your book, one of the chapters talks about the exploitation of the poor in clinical trials. Can you shed some light on that for us?
Well, let me be blunt about this thing. First, you can say, as I said, there's people that say it's exploitative and it's unethical, and some people say it's right. It's like any kind of job. It's going to a McDonald's job. If you don't like it, you can walk off. You don't have to be there. It's your choice to be there. What's the problem? So there's a debate. I'm just offering one interpretation. I think there's not IRBs at McDonald's, right? But there's IRBs in clinical trials, and for a reason, because of the abuses in the past. And I think it's a good thing. And I think that rich people don't do trials. They just wait until the drugs come out, and they just buy them through their healthcare plans, their HMOs. Middle-class people don't do trials if they can avoid it either. For phase 1, of course, they do for phases 2 and 3.
Okay,
for phase 1, the motivation is money. Some people said, I asked them, what's your motivation? And I'll say money. Of course, if the drug works, you might be helping science or helping, humanity by providing a new drug, a new therapeutic opportunity, but they don't do it because they want to help science. They do it because of the money, and they need the money because they are poor. For them, the choice is between a low-paying job like a McDonald's job or a construction working job or a restaurant job or a guinea pig job, and some do both and, move back and forth, and some decide that they want to build a career and as a guinea pig, and they only do that. But the problematic thing for me is like there's no protection or almost very little protection for professional subjects in trials. You know, they don't get compensated for injuries. They don't get compensated if something really bad happens to them. Of course, they can sue if they die. Their families could, but you know, it's not a perfect situation. And the pharmaceutical industry has so much power that, you know, really it's not a balanced relationship, and that's where I see the kind of potential for abuses. I think that's the thing about exploitation. But you know, even if you disagree, and I know you're on the industry side, so some people or most people even would disagree with me. I'm gonna say this. I think there's still value in my work because it tells you a lot about the people you depend upon to run your thoughts and to do your career. No, it's the first one that tells you this is what they are, this is how they think about the trials, this is how they think about themselves, this is about how they think about their profession, their guinea pig trade, this is how they see the regulations, this is how they see the industry, this is how they cheat you. There's a chapter about resistance in the workplace, and as I said, like any kind of worker that is not happy with the working conditions, you know, you slack as a worker, and guinea pigs have ways of lacking or trying to really disrupt the trials and mess up. And I have even a chapter about that, you know, so that may be interesting to know, I think, for your audience as well, you know, what they can do about that, other than improving working conditions and pay. But I think it's an interesting chapter as well.
Right.
Tell me, you read it, right? So what's the thing you like the most, if I can interview you?
Well, what I liked, I mean, believe it or not, I agree with most of your book. I do think that phase one volunteers, healthy volunteers, you know, the only incentive for them is the money. That is true. However, I do think they could build a registry, which is kind of like the biggest thing I would agree with you on, and I think most people in the industry would agree with you as well. I wanted to ask you, what do you think would be the incentive for Big Pharma to do that, to create a registry? Do you think they realize that there's a problem and just ignore it, or are they oblivious to the issue going on with exploitation?
There's a lot of pressure for contract research organizations to recruit, right? And it's a business, so the faster you recruit, the more viable you are as a business, the more money you make. And it's like a treadmill. It's like a game. There's a lot of money in the line, so you're not thinking about these kind of things you should be thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, so it's not. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I don't have this view about, you know, a very bad, nasty industry that does conspiratorial things to screw up guinea pigs. It's not about that, but it's a business. They need to recruit. You know, sometimes they don't want to focus on things that really would slow down the process. If you slow down the rate of recruitment, then you hurt your business, and nobody wants to do that. If you create a registry, and that slows business down, no, that's not an incentive for them. But I'm going to tell you what I think is a big incentive, or should be a big incentive for the industry to create for creation of the registry, lawsuits. You know, because if you endanger a guinea pig, a subject, a human being, because they are participating in many different trials, one after another, you know, and, you know, the toxicity of the drugs are really high, and they interact with each other or with something you don't know, and really they get hurt. And then they sue you, and in court they find out that you knew they were doing, as an industry, they were doing like sequential trials, or that they were enrolling in more than one trial at a time, and you did nothing to prevent that.
Mm-hmm.
No, that really might hurt them. And also, I think the industry cares a lot good quality drugs. People that are enrolling into trials at the same time are really, first, compromising their health because it's risky. And secondly, they're screwing up the quality of the data produced, because in a trial, you are just having typically a drug you're going to test against a placebo, right? You're testing the safety of drug A against nothing, a placebo. And you're assuming that the volunteer is taking not other drug, but drug A, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if they're cheating on you, and at the same time, because there's no registry and there's no way of preventing this, they're also taking in another trial drug B. So are you assessing the toxicity of drug A only, or are you also assessing the toxicity of drug B?
Yeah,
No,
and done.
you know how messed up can that get?
How many?
It's kind of tricky, and I think the model the American pharmaceutical industry could follow is the European model. Like they have a registry, and the registry is set up by the industry.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in Europe is this. You know, people were just hoping from country to country, doing trials. Let's say they would do a trial in Ireland, then they would just finish the trial, move to the UK. Then they finish that one, they move to Germany, and then they move to France, and then back to Ireland.
They do that, yeah.
Trials in one after another.
That's pretty intense.
Compromises the quality of the data, and also compromises the health of the volunteers, and exposes them to unknown risks. You know, it's not good for the industry. So after it was a trial in 2006, sponsored by Parcel, some people really got really badly injured in England, and after that, the industry stepped in and they just created this registry that tracks the participation of human subjects in phase 1 trials. It's industry-based, so it's financed and supported by the industry. It's not independently supported by government, for example, or a third party. It's something that is an interest that was generated by the industry, a concern that came from the industry, and as a response, they created the registry. I think it may be a good first step, or a good step for big pharma here in the U.S. I have trouble with the way they set up the registry, but I rather see something than nothing.
Mm-hmm. And it's possible for them to set up a registry, and I think what is happening right now, to some degree, they're doing it without even realizing it. They're starting to use one of the subcontractors to handle a lot of the training, a lot of the monitoring of the patients that you put into the system, and I think that's one way to do it, because you're putting in, when you do that, you're putting in basically a profile. Even though you're not putting in the name, you're putting in date of birth, and you're also placing in the system initials. Right. And to some, that may not be 100%, because I've run across this before where patients are using different initials and maybe different date of birth, and you're not required to look at identification. That might be one way to do it, and I think they're already somewhat doing it without realizing it.
Yeah, but I think it has to be a systematic-wide kind of thing, a broad kind of enterprise. Otherwise you would have holes. Once you have holes, then you have leaks. It's not good. You have to have some consistency, so you're going to be able to say, no, we are really preventing double dipping, right?
Exactly, and I think it not so. And I mean, I think you're helping not just, you are helping the industry. Because here's what's going on is that when you have someone that's doing multiple studies and the sponsor finds out, then both sites lose out. And just like we realize that this is a business from top to bottom. And if you're running your investigational site and you learn later on that this client that you have in a study is also in another study, then you have to discharge them out of that study, which means that's potential income that you've just lost, and all because of this person became sort of greedy in their approach of earning money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's my point. You asked me what's the incentive for big pharma, for the industry to set up a registry, and that's a very good argument. They have very good arguments to do that, because it's the way the business is organized. It's kind of a Wild West kind of thing. No centralized registry, no records, no nothing. It's almost like a black economy. You just go there. You're supposed, as a guinea pig, to report taxes on your income, but they don't. It's kind of like a shady kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a subculture. It is, yeah.
You're right.
It is true. We deal with a lot of phase 1. not at our day job at South Coast, we do like phase 2 through 4, but
Mm-hmm.
I deal with a lot of phase 1 people, just interacting with them on Facebook and through the blog, and yeah, they pretty much, tell me that, they do it for the money, and, they kind of try to, they live like a, what's the word I'm looking for? A nomadic lifestyle where they'll just travel. They don't care where they go as long as there's a study there, and then they'll kind of, hang out for a few weeks and then go somewhere else. So I really doubt that they report the income they get on their taxes.
Yeah, and I think because the tax laws I think are set up that if you earn a certain amount of, I think if you earn less than 600 within a month, you don't have to report it. And I think that's the way, if I'm correct on
That's
that.
one way. That's one way of doing it, and then some don't report anything anyway. But just talking about this nomadic kind of crowd, some people travel all over the country. The group I study in Philadelphia, mostly they do not, because there are so many opportunities in around Philadelphia, New Jersey, that area, right? So they don't travel that much. But I know people that travel, and I interview people that travel all over the country, and that people really have like additional risks as volunteers, because let's say you are traveling, right? You go to a trial, and that's your investment, right? You pay your bus fare, you stay in a cheap hotel, you buy food for a couple of weeks before you really get enrolled into the trial, and those are expenses, right? So by the time you really get into the trial, you have, as a volunteer, almost no way of saying no. I don't think I can do this trial. It's too risky, and there's something I don't like.
Good point.
Because you spend $200, $300, $400. Of course, hoping you could make $2,000 or $3,000, right? So by the time you have to sign the consent form, you made your mind already, and you sign almost to anything, because otherwise you'll be stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do and having to spend the money you had already. So you see, that's the kind of the things I was looking at when I wrote my book, when I was doing my research. The kind of vulnerabilities or the kind of dangers or risks people get into because they are poor and screwed up and depend upon the money. So it's a very, I think, basic kind of description. I'm not just, saying things because I felt like it, or it's just my opinion. It's, of course, I have my opinion, but I think it's really documented in a very careful description of the lives of the professional subjects in the U.S. And even if you disagree with the interpretations I make, the narratives and the descriptions, I think they are good. And the guinea pigs I interviewed, the volunteers I interviewed, they were terrific. So smart, so cool. They said really very good things. Their stories of trial participation are outstanding, are really, engaging. I think most people, my book has been really popular. I had a lot of press, and I think in part was because the guinea pigs themselves were so interesting as characters.
I was going to ask you, Roberto, how has your book been received, and how has it been doing as far as sales and things like that? What was
amazingly well. I had, I deal with some of the guinea pigs, like Bob Helms and others from Philadelphia. A small video for Time magazine when the book came out 1 year ago. That was great. And then I got interviewed by the BBC, the Guardian, a lot of places, even places in Brazil interviewed me as well. So it has been a very nice surprise. Telling, actually a lot of people are using it in their courses. People are reading it. I'm really happy with the way it turned out.
It's a very well-researched book, and we'll have a link on the bottom of our video. Everyone should go get it, especially if you work in the industry. If you're a research professional and you're watching this, you need to get this book. Even if you don't do phase 1 studies, let's say you're at a clinic and you do phase 2, 3, 4 studies, you still should understand this book, because without the phase 1 studies, we won't get to the phase 2. And so on. So it is a good book.
And also, too, you touched on some other points that we really haven't talked about, but you've actually touched on them in this whole subject, is we're constantly pushing, from the investigational site perspective, is to get what I call non-recycled patients. Because, if you keep getting the same people over and over again, you're basically getting the same data over and over again.
Right. We're looking for research-naive participants.
That's it is, but that's the problem with this country. There's a limited number of people willing to be professional guinea pigs. So guinea pigs, they just wait until the dog comes out and they see right? So I know the industry is moving abroad. There's a big push for places like China, India, and Brazil as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not that much for phase 1, but for phases 2 and 3. And what they're looking for is what you just said. This is treatment-naive patient, in a patient that has not been treated before, or at least it's not in 20 different drugs when they're doing the trial.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Roberto, how has the recession impacted, these phase 1 volunteers? Have you seen a greater interest in the phase 1 participation because of the recession?
And I think that's also part of the popular interest in my book and the press interest in my book, because it's a job, right? So it's something that people would do in a recession. When they enter in this desperation move that I have to pay my mortgage or I might lose my car, and I'm willing to do things I never thought I would.
Yeah.
So there's more people volunteering or willing to volunteer for phase 1 trials.
Okay.
But of course, the number of trials didn't increase that much. It's fixed. I think it's a good thing. It might be a good thing for contract research organizations because they would have a broader, set of people to choose from.
They do, and they are being more selective. I talked with this guy on Facebook, and he does a lot of these phase 1 studies. We've actually interviewed him on the show before, and he said for the first time in his life, he was screen failed for one of these studies last week because of his blood pressure, and his blood pressure was never an issue before, but now they're just getting more candidates, so they can be more selective.
And they have a lot of targets, they have to meet. So if they see your blood pressure or something some enzyme that is not there, before they would say, okay, no problem, it will go up, or we just wait, or whatever. And now it's like no, and you have to be there. And I think employers overall across America are doing the same thing. When we had this bubble, everybody would be employed, no matter what. And now they're just picking you about thinking about whether you are employed or unemployed, which I think is totally crazy, because if you're an employer looking for jobs, they don't like that. They want to hire somebody that is employed, and then, of course, over age or over 40 or 50, you are too old. If you are too young and experienced, it's also no good. I think it's the same kind of pattern because it's part of the same economy, and that's the argument I wanted to make. This is not just about volunteers or altruistic people doing it in a bubble. This is a job. This is a big business.
Yeah, I think it's a great analogy.
For the industry, it's a big business that depends on the participation of paid healthy subjects, and for the volunteers, it's also a way of making a living. So that's the way I'm looking at it as an economic activity, not just a bubble kind of thing. And I think it's the same way the volunteers think about what they're doing. So it really helped me have the same kind of perspective. And that's the kind of story I'm just telling of people trying to making it and becoming professionals and becoming embedded in this economy, and that's the thing,
You had a very interesting story regarding something that happened in Miami in the past. Can you share with our audience a little bit about that?
Well, my story is based on a investigative journalistic report by somebody that worked at Bloomberg. I think it was in 2004 or 5. A contract research site was enrolling poor undocumented Latinos, mostly from Central America, into their trial sites. And they were busted, and of course, it was a big thing. The media made a big fuss about it. The people got really enraged, and as a consequence, that site had to shut down. They are no longer in operation. So I think that's one of the things that encourages me the most to talk about these issues and to talk especially with the press, because I sense that sometimes the industry fails to do what is right for them, as we discussed before, maybe because they have other pressures or other priorities, but they don't do always the right thing. And the good thing is, like, if you call attention to what's not right through the press, people really get concerned about it. And if they lose businesses or if they have to shut down, well, then they really change. And I think that, yes, the situation now it's much better than it was 10 years ago, right? There's no, I haven't heard of in the last 2 or 3 years, for example, of serious violations of, like enrolling undocumented Latinos in trial sites, or enrolling poor African American homeless men with, mental problems, and drug use problems, like Eddie Lilly did in the Midwest in the 90s. No, that kind of thing. I think part of that Wild West frontier, it doesn't exist anymore. Part is self-interest from the industry, and part is pressure from the press and the media and the society. Whatever it is, I think it's a very good trend. The industry doesn't have to be unethical to make money, and that's my. I'm not an advocate for the industry. I know they can take care of themselves by themselves, but my thing is like this. Like you can make money, a lot of money, doing the right thing. I hope they do, and I'm just not trying to help them actually, but I'm just telling them I think you should do it, and I give them some ideas about how to create a centralized registry and how to follow guinea pigs better and professional subjects better, how to reward them better, how to treat them nicely, but if they don't, well, they don't.
Well, Roberto, you're going to anger a lot of the Phase 1 volunteers because you're advocating the registry. Have you angered any of them so far?
We're not angry with them. We disagree. We disagree about that. As I say, the industry doesn't want to have any limits on their ability to recruit volunteers, and the volunteers themselves don't want to have any limitations on the number of trials they can do. Of course, for both of them, it's business, right? So they are looking at the money side. For me, I'm looking at like a public health issue. I'm looking for what's good for the volunteers, not just now, but in the long term. And I know that, or I suspect, that's my big concern, is about what might happen to them in a particular trial. I know most trials are very safe and there's almost no adverse events, but I'm worried about what might happen to these guys, 20, 30 years from now, after they have done 100 trials, how these different substances might interact with each other, with other medications that they might need to take as they go older and sick, and with pollutants that are in the environment. I'm worried about long-term risks, and I know that the fewer trials they do, or the less trials and exposure they have, the better for them. So that's my interest, like to limit long-term damage and risks. Right. If they're looking for the money and short-term gain, they would disagree with me, and we have these conversations, about that. Maybe they have a point. I have a series of recommendations. I think you have to have a centralized registry, but also be able also to pay them better, so they have fewer trial opportunities, but they will make almost the same amount of money or more money.
Interesting. I have never heard of that proposal. I've heard of the union. There were talks about having a union for Phase 1 volunteers.
Yes, I also talk about Bob Counts. I don't know if you know him, from Guinea Pig Zero.
Yeah.
He was a union organizer. He's a close friend and collaborator with my research, and he was a union organizer. So I asked, do you think you could do it? Do you think it's possible to have a union? It's very hard because they travel all over the country. After the trial is over, they disband. They just go back to their home towns, or they just move to another trial site. So it's very hard to organize that. It's like trying to organize migrant agricultural workers. They're not like it's not a factory that you work there 20, 30 years, and you can build a union around Ford or GM or GM or whatever, and you know that you have 20, 30 years of families and communities being there, and you can really talk with them and try to organize them. How do you organize guinea pigs? They just show up 1 or 2 weeks a place before a trial, they are enrolled, they do the trial, and then they move on.
And it would be difficult too, because first of all, you're going to have willing participants in the union, and if they're trying to roll from one study to the next study, they're not going to want to be tracked. And that's the whole issue that you brought up to begin with, is that there need to be a tracking system. And if they're already opposed to that, then there's no way they're going to want to join a union.
It's very impractical to. It's very hard to have populations. It's very hard to organize. So I don't think the response for the improvement of their condition is going to come through unionizing, at least. It would help if they could put it off, of course, but it's not a very good time for unions in America anyway. So there's not a national movement for unions and workers' rights. So they are not that's not the right it's not the right time for that kind of effort. I wish it could work, but there's a lot of limitations and troubles to implement it. I think what can really help them in the short term is the recession, as you said. The sites are being more selective, and that really creates some barriers to participation. And also, I think globalization also might help some, But
yeah.
I think you get into some other issues too with this whole thing, is that even though people who enter studies are not patients, they're subjects or volunteers. And it's not treatment, it's a voluntary program. But yet at the same time, their information falls up under HIPAA. So I think that's where sometimes you run into the whole dilemma of how would you share that information without violating HIPAA. You would have to, again, get permission from the individual. What if the individual does not want to have that information shared? So I mean, that's the problem. That's the problem, because one of the things if you're tracking them, one of the things I think you should focus to help them is to focus on recording adverse events. If something bad happens to them during the trial, you want to be able to collect that kind of information, right? Of course, if they're not volunteering that, it won't happen, and that's not good. No, it's not, because I have exactly what you were talking about discovered in my years of working in this industry of clients trying to do multiple studies, and I had to sort of put the damper on one client who was actually telling other people you can do multiple studies at the same time. And I had to sit down and have a long talk with that person and let them know that that they're putting these people at risk. We're dealing with unknown medications. That's why they're testing the medications, not only to see how safe it is, with the individual and the human body, as well as how it's going to interact with other drugs. And if that hasn't been done, and you're basically telling these people to do their own experimentation, you're really putting them as well as yourself at risk. And then if you're telling people to do that, you also have to feel responsible for what may be the outcome.
Professional subjects, they talk about the trial in the trials. They're there for like days or weeks at a time. They have nothing to do. They talk a lot of bullshit, right? But one of the things they really talk about is about money and money-making opportunities. All the trials, they talk about trial sites, which are the good ones, which are the bad ones, where to go, what about how the cities look like, where to get there, how to get there, how much money you can make, the diet you can find, the kind of food you can find in different facilities, and the kind of stuff you can find, some problematic members you want to avoid, or some nice people you want to find met or work with. So they talk a lot about that, but they also circulate ideas about how to cheat the system, or how to trick the system, by doing two trials at the same time. And once you can do it, maybe you just have to report a different initial when you just write your name down, or you just go with a different license, driver's license to collect to the trial. It's very easy to sneak in and do what you're not supposed to be doing. They're smart people, and that's their business. So they really take care of any opportunity they have to make money. That's why I think we need some kind of regulation.
We do.
Roberto, because I know a lot of people listening might think, well, if they want to screw up themselves, fuck them. And if the industry doesn't want to regulate them, and they might if they get hit later with a big lawsuit, too bad for them. But for me, how that affects me? It affects everybody, because if you have a professional subject double dipping, doing two trials at the same time, that really hurts them, or might really compromise their health. But more importantly, they compromise the quality of the data.
Yes.
They are producing. I really don't know if I should trust the data coming from clinical trials in the U.S. anymore, because there's so many things that are wrong.
Yeah, and that's a drug that theoretically you, I, or Don could need to take one day. And we need to be able to depend on the data and the system as a whole to let us know that, you
the
know...
dog seems to be fine, but just because they missed the fact that a guinea pig was doing, or half of the people in the town, maybe, or one-third were doing two trials at the same time.
Yeah, I think an interesting future topic, an addendum to this, would be to look at other countries like India, Brazil. Of course, Brazil sounds like they pretty much pattern what we do here, but China,
Argentina,
and
India.
Yeah, and India, and see exactly how their participation of subjects are done and how it impacts the industry as well.
Well, I'm going to just go to Brazil in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to be there for 4 months doing research on clinical trials, not phase 1, but trials to develop generic drugs. But I'm really concerned about not Brazil that much, but China. You know, human rights in China, they're not, I mean, they're terrible, right? And I think it's the pharmaceutical industry is an industry that the Chinese government, the state wants to promote. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure they are mindful of the risks for participants and for subjects, and mindful or if they care actually about that. You know, there are really gruesome recollections of prisoners in China being shot and their kidneys or other organs being removed for organ transplantation. So, you know, as I said, human rights is doesn't seem to be a big thing in China. Right. And I really worried about the protections that the Chinese regime would be able to implement to protect volunteers in clinical trials research. Really concerned and really, you know, worried about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the FDA even has jurisdiction over there.
Well, it's interesting because we've spoken with people in India and
numerous times,
and their approach to finding patients are completely different too. Because what was shared with us was that the doctor will determine the level of care for that patient of theirs, and because their patient has no money to basically pay for the service. Then whatever they get is better than what their status quo is, which is zero. So they're being placed into studies with, it sounds to me like without even having the knowledge that they're in a study. And
that's a terrible problem, right? With that exploitation, I mean, talking about exploitation, that's totally exploitive because they are thinking they're getting treatment, but in reality they are just guinea pigs. You know, that's terrible.
Yeah.
They don't have even the distinction that treatment is not, the drug is not treatment. They don't have even that. Of course, they never had access to health care. They never had treatment before. They're treatment naive, but not because they are very healthy. They are treatment naive because they could not afford treatment to begin with. And then they have this opportunity, so-called opportunity, to have some kind of medical oversight or supervision or access through being a guinea pig, and they're just jumping at this opportunity, but without realizing that actually a trial is a scientific experiment designed to answer a scientific question. You know, is this, for phase 1, drug safe? And for phases 2 and 3, is this drug safe and effective?
Right.
That's not treatment, right? It might work. And if it works, if it does, then you get something. But the design of the trial is not therapeutic. So,
no, it's just data collection.
A big concern I have, and a lot of people have, about clinical trials moving abroad to places like China, India, and Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
Have
you heard Roberto of Alex O'Mara? He's another author.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had him on the show a few times, and he talks about, he's focuses on international trials now, but he's definitely on the same page with you as far as what they call therapeutic misconception.
That's it. Yeah, I didn't want to say that because it sounds terrible, right? It sounds so nasty. It sounds bad, right? But the therapeutic misconception is what happens when you think you're getting something and you're a guinea pig.
Right.
You're not getting anything, right? You're thinking you're being treated, but it's not treatment. It's just a scientific experiment designed to, answer some kind of scientific question or produce some kind of knowledge or validate some kind of, knowledge. So you're a guinea pigging. You're guinea pigging, but you're thinking you're being a patient.
Right, whether you know it or you're not, you're being a subject. Switching back to the U.S. and to kind of wrap this whole thing up, we kind of get the idea. Whenever you see an ad on TV or you see something about clinical trials on the internet as far as an ad, they try to play off like, the people who volunteer for clinical trials should be considered heroes, and we agree with that. Now, you've interviewed a lot of phase 1 healthy volunteers who do these studies primarily for the money. Do you ever get the sense that they are trying to help society at all?
They're trying to help themselves. They tell me, being a guinea pig phase 1 is so boring. You have to be there, you're stuck with a lot of people you don't care about. You have lousy food or okay food, but you have to, it's like being in prison, right? Or being in a hotel, or being in a hospital room, but without being sick. So it's very boring. You have a lot of time in your hands without nothing to do, and then you go, you do a blood draw, you do some other things, you take a drug, another dose, and then you dose for a little bit, and then you do another stuff, and then it's really boring. Their motivation, as I said, this is, they're seen as self-contractors, independent workers, it's a work. It's work. Mm-hmm. It's not fun, and they never told me my main motivation is to help pharma develop new drugs or to help science produce new knowledge or new understanding about. They all told me either I do it only for the money or money is my main motivation. I wouldn't do it for free, or I wouldn't do it out of the goodness of my heart. A few said things like, I do it for the money, but if the drug works, well, I'll be doing something good, and I have no trouble with that. If the drug helps somebody else, I feel good about it.
Right.
It's not my main motivation they're not heroes. They're not out there to help humanity. They're out there to survive, to make it. And if in the process, some drug is produced or developed, then, they're cool with that. They're not selfish in that sense. They're like, okay, good, if the drug works,
Yeah. I think you get the heroes coming in later on, like in the phase 2 and 3.
Phases 2 and 3. I think, they have this thing about, volunteering and being altruistic and giving these gifts, of your time, your effort, your body there, your boredom. This sacrifice is like a gift, like organ donation. That's the way they talk about organ donors as being, heroes as well. So there's this narrative in these fields about being a hero, helping to save lives or to do something extraordinary. Organ donation and phases 2 and 3. I think it's very hard to motivate people to do things out of the goodness of their heart. So I understand the idea behind the hero kind of thing. For phases 1, for phase 1, no, people are like, no, they will laugh if you ask them if they feel like they are heroes,
Yeah, I know they would. I would interview a few of them, and they would laugh at that as well. So it's good to get the plain truth.
I knew they would.
It's good to get the plain truth on this blog because that's what we try to do. Roberto, as we wrap up, are you working on any future projects that we should know about?
I'm working on this Brazilian project, but I'm not working on any American projects right now.
Okay.
If I do, I'll let you know.
Yeah, let me know. We have a few connections out there in Argentina. So if you're ever doing anything related to clinical trials in Argentina, let us know. I'll put you in touch with some good people.
Now that I'm going to Brazil?
Brazil, no. Don might, but no. We know a few in Argentina that are pretty involved in clinical trials in that country. But Brazil...
Keep you in mind that.
I can ask them if they know anyone in Brazil. I'll do that.
Okay. Great talking to you.
Nice talking to you too, and everyone go get the book. We'll put the link on to Amazon. And it's a good book. It's a must-read if you're in research. Really is a must-read. Whether you agree with the title or not, forget about that. Just read the book for the research this guy's done to put this thing together. So thank you very much, Roberto, for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Thanks to you. Bye-bye.
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 So this is Dan and Don signing off from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. It was a fantastic interview.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I do recommend everyone go get this book. It's great. When I first saw the title, I wasn't sure what to expect when Roberto sent it to me. But I'm glad I read it because it made me more informed about this industry. So let us know what you guys think. It's Dan and Don from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thanks.